That day, stepping out of the cinema after. The day the earth stood still, I felt something hard to name a heavy silence. The flying saucer still hovered in my mind. Gort's metallic body stood motionless like a statue passing judgment. Klaatu's calm voice echoed on neither threatening nor shouting, yet so cold it made you afraid to move. A science fiction film in which the end of the world still seemed manageable. But the older I got, the more I rewatched it, the more I realized that calmness was the result of many things being suffocated. Did you know the US military read the script and turned away without hesitation? Because the film dared to say what they did not want to hear. That Gort the robot, the cold symbol of absolute power, was created from a real man enduring real pain. Inside a suit so heavy, it pushed him to exhaustion. And that the ending, you know, was only a replacement after the original ending, in which humanity destroys itself with nuclear bombs, was quietly executed for being too dangerous to the spirit of its time. Today, we reopen that flying saucer to descend into the film's colder backstage layers, where The Day the Earth Stood Still nearly became a direct indictment and nearly was never allowed to stand still in cinematic history. 15. Spencer Tracy said no, and a memory crossed out. Whenever I thought of Klaatu, I always imagined a familiar man, calm posture, world-weary eyes, the kind of character who only needs to appear for the audience to sit up straighter, ready to listen. Very old-school Hollywood, where authority doesn't need to shout, standing still is heavy enough. Hollywood thought the same. When The Day the Earth Stood Still went into production, the first name that surfaced almost reflexively was Spencer Tracy. He read the script. He liked the role of Klaatu, and on paper, no one seemed more fitting, intellectual, composed, radiating a credibility that made others want to believe even if he were an alien. But that was precisely what caused everything to collapse. Producer Julian Blaustein rejected Tracy almost immediately. The reason sounded cruel but was razor sharp. Tracy was too famous, too human. Audiences wouldn't see Klaatu, they'd only see Spencer Tracy playing Klaatu. And for a film that lived on a sense of otherness that was a death sentence from the opening minute, Claude Rains was considered next. But Broadway held on to him. The role slipped away. In the end, Darryl F. Zanuck proposed a name. American audiences had barely heard Michael Rennie, a British actor. His first American film. No aura, no collective memory to cling to, and that made him perfect. Hollywood often believes stars sell tickets. The Day the Earth Stood Still understood the opposite. For audiences to believe in an alien, they first had to forget the human standing in front of them. 14. The doorman steps out of the shadows and becomes Gort. Anyone who has seen The Day the Earth Stood Still remembers Gort. Not because he says anything, he never utters a word. Not because he acts, most of the time he simply stands there. But that silence is what makes him terrifying. A towering metallic figure, smooth and cold, as if a single movement could make the entire world stop, just like the film's title. Gort was never meant to resemble a human. And the man inside the suit, ironically, wasn't an actor either. Lock Martin was a doorman at Grauman's Chinese theatre. No agent, no training, no cinematic ambition. The only thing that caught director Robert Wise's attention was his absurd height. Wise needed a Gort that required no cheating angles, no exaggerated makeup, just someone who could stand there so tall that everything around him seemed smaller. After months of fruitless searching across Los Angeles, someone casually mentioned that ridiculously tall doorman at the Chinese theatre. Wise saw Martin and hired him immediately. No audition, no hesitation. Martin stood 7 feet 7 inches tall, among the tallest men in California at the time. Before donning the immortal metal shell, he had only done a few bit parts Cowboys milk commercials. Never a star. And then Hollywood's familiar paradox unfolded. The most anonymous man became one of cinema's most indelible images. No dialogue, no expression, just standing still, and Gort became immortal. 13. The metal suit and pain without a credit. There's a tiny detail I subconsciously look for every time I rewatch The Day the Earth Stood Still. Not the saucer, not Klaatu, but Gort's right arm. A nearly imperceptible movement, a slight twitch so subtle it feels like an old technical flaw. I once thought it was film jitter or clumsy 1950s effects, something viewers should ignore. But it wasn't a film error. It was human. On screen, Gort's suit looked smooth, cold and invulnerable. In reality, it was a crude torture device, made of thick foam rubber painted aluminum combined with metal and rigid plastic components. Heavy. Sealed, unventilated. For Lock Martin. Large but physically fragile, each time inside the suit could last only about 30 minutes before his body began to fail. To maintain the robot's posture, Martin had to keep his right arm pressed tightly against his side throughout the shot. Muscles locked, pun accumulating. Then spasms. When the pain exceeded his limit, his arm twitched right in front of the camera. No acting, no intention. Just the reflex of a body forced to remain still for too long. Hollywood didn't stop rolling. Didn't cut the scene. Because on screen, Gort remained perfect cold, stable, emotionless. The price of that image, a real human's pain, was never mentioned. And as usual, it didn't appear in the credits. 12. The banned ending, an extinction sentence Hollywood wouldn't let audiences see. You probably remember The Day the Earth Stood Still ending as a gentle warning. Klaatu leaves Earth. Gort stands still. The world still has a chance. The film closes before anyone has to take real responsibility. An ending hopeful enough for audiences to leave without carrying fear home. But that wasn't the original ending. In the first script, the film didn't stop at a warning. It went straight to consequences. Klaatu made himself clear. Humanity listened, and then did what it always does, ignored it. No disarmament, no change in violent nature. The final act was neither vague nor metaphorical. Nuclear bombs detonated. A blinding white flash consumed the frame. No second chances, no silent departure. Only a cold conclusion: humanity destroys itself after being fully warned. When this ending was screened internally, the response wasn't debate, but silence. A terrifying silence. In the Cold War context, when nuclear anxiety was an open wound of the era, Hollywood understood exactly what they were facing. Not a science fiction film, but a moral verdict no one wanted to release to the public. The decision came swiftly and decisively. This ending could not exist. Not revised, not softened. Completely erased, replaced by the ending you remember: ambiguous, safe, acceptable. At certain moments in history, the most frightening thing isn't the apocalypse. It's a film daring to say we were warned and we still chose wrong. 11. The military said no when the Pentagon finished reading and turned away. Back then, every time I watched The Day the Earth Stood Still, I felt something hard to name. The military appears a lot, yet never looks heroic. Tanks roll, soldiers raise their guns. Washington is sealed off, but everything radiates confusion and helplessness, as if they're reacting on instinct rather than controlling the situation. For an early 1950s American film, that feeling is strange. And it wasn't accidental. It was the result of a very real shake of the head behind the scenes. When the script was sent to the US Department of Defense, the response came quickly and tersely. No. No cooperation, no support, no loan of any equipment. The reason didn't need elaboration. The film was anti-war, did not glorify the military, criticised nuclear weapons, and went further than acceptable by declaring that humanity's violent nature could threaten the entire universe. The Pentagon did not want its name attached to a story like that. Director Robert Wise had to take a detour. Tanks and military hardware were borrowed from the Virginia National Guard and a cavalry regiment. No official backing, no image consultants. Only what was barely sufficient to shoot the film. If you look closely, you can still see their insignia on the tanks in the movie. A small detail, but clear proof that this film was turned away by its own country's military. And perhaps because of that, it is one of the very few American films where the military appears without being cast as the hero. 10. Klaatu Barada Nikto, the meaningless phrase that refused to disappear. There are lines you remember because you understand them. And there are lines you remember precisely because you don't understand them at all. Klaatu Barada Nikto belongs to the second kind. The first time I heard it, it sounded strange, chilling, and slightly ridiculous. No subtitles, no explanation. No one in the film bothers to say what it means. And yet years later, I still remember its rhythm. The truth is, the phrase is completely meaningless. Edmund H. North, the screenwriter, invented it from scratch. No ancient language, no alien code, no hidden philosophy. It just had to sound not human, and that was enough. But that very meaninglessness is what gave it longevity. Klaatu Barada Nikto became a kind of cultural password in science fiction. It appears in films, books, music, comics, video games. And it's always used the same way without explanation. Those who get it, get it. Those who don't, still remember it. The paradox is this: in a film packed with heavy moral messages, the most memorable thing is an empty phrase. But perhaps that is cinema's power. Not everything that haunts us needs meaning. Some sounds exist solely to evoke a feeling danger taboo and irreversibility. Even the 2008 remake kept the line intact. Didn't dare change it. Didn't dare replace it. Because some things, once they've entered history, whether they mean anything or not, no longer matters. 9. The Carpenter from the Sky, a religious story told in a whisper. Did you ever notice the name Klaatu uses while living among humans, Mr. Carpenter? It sounds harmless enough. A very ordinary American name, easy to blend into the crowd. But the older I get, the more that detail feels anything but innocent. Carpenter. A word far too obvious to be coincidence. Klaatu comes to Earth with a message of peace. He is doubted, rejected, killed, then resurrected, and finally leaves the world. At that point, the story is no longer science fiction. It's a version of Jesus wrapped in flying saucers and robots retold for a world living in nuclear fear. The Day the Earth Stood Still doesn't dare preach religion openly, but it whispers clearly. In the Cold War era, when every symbol was scrutinized, this was the only way a story of salvation could exist. Klaatu is not a savior in the traditional sense. He doesn't stay, doesn't rule, doesn't judge. He only warns and then departs. Hollywood cleverly transformed a religious narrative into science fiction to slip past censorship politics and the anxieties of its time. And perhaps that's why the film still carries weight today. Not because it speaks loudly, but because it speaks very softly straight into humanity's most sensitive nerve. 8. No one actually went to Washington, a capital built from distance, when I first watched The Day the Earth Stood Still. I never questioned the setting. Washington appeared exactly as one imagines the center of power of the free worldwide plazas, solemn monuments, tension in the air. The flying saucer lands there not just for geography, but for symbolism. To audiences, everything looks completely real. The truth is not a single main actor ever set foot in Washington. All performances were filmed in Los Angeles. Exterior shots of DC were handled by a separate unit, then stitched together using rear projection compositing and stand-ins. No CGI, no modern tools, just visual discipline and precision so convincing that viewers had no reason to doubt. The point isn't the technique, but the meaning. Washington in the film isn't a real place. It's an idea, a center of power where wrong decisions can trigger global consequences. It's constructed from distance exactly like power often exists in real life far from ordinary people, yet affecting everyone. The Day the Earth Stood Still was never really about Washington. It was about power, and power, in the end, is always a carefully staged performance. 7. When a president echoed the film's warning. In 1985, during a private conversation with Mikhail Gorbachev, President Ronald Reagan, unexpectedly proposed a thought experiment. If humanity faced a threat from outside Earth, all national differences would instantly disappear. It sounded like science fiction, and indeed it was. Reagan was echoing the core spirit of The Day the Earth Stood Still, a 1951 sci-fi film once rejected by the US military, quietly shaped how a president viewed global conflict more than 3 decades later. In a world split by the Cold War and nuclear fear, the idea that humanity could only unite when confronted by an outsider was both naive and terrifying. What matters is this. Reagan didn't say it publicly. He said it in the closed diplomatic dialogue as a test of thought, a moral question wrapped in speculation. Hollywood rarely changes politics directly, but sometimes it plants an idea and waits a very long time for that idea to find someone powerful enough to repeat it in a real voice. 6. A robot that can't carry anyone when power needs cables to exist. There was a scene I once believed completely Gort carrying Patricia Neal's character with cold precision, as if gravity simply didn't apply to him. A perfect image of absolute power, no effort, no hesitation. But Gort couldn't carry anyone at all. The man inside the robot suit, Lock Martin, wasn't strong enough. Rear shots used a lightweight dummy. Lifting shots relied on cables hidden outside the frame. At times, both Michael Rennie and Neal were replaced by mannequins just to complete the composition. In the final climax, Martin couldn't even stand in frame because the suit was too heavy and the sloped surface threw him off balance. The robot capable of destroying Earth had to stay off screen, and that paradox is deeply truthful. On screen, Gort is absolute power. In reality, he exists thanks to cables, cuts, and cinematic illusion. Power always looks solid from a distance. Only up close do we see what's holding it upright. 5. The blacklist, one role in exchange for a career. When I watched The Day the Earth Stood Still, Professor Barnhart always felt like a strange anchor, an aging, weary scientist who speaks slowly, yet whose eyes are terrifyingly lucid. He's one of the few characters who understands that the greatest threat doesn't come from outer space, but from humanity itself. A supporting role heavy with moral weight. In real life, the man who played him was Sam Jaffe, and he was the one who paid the real price. During production, Jaffe's name appeared in red channels, an unofficial blacklist targeting individuals suspected of communist ties. Being named was often enough to end a career overnight. The studio panicked and wanted to fire him. Producer Julian Blaustein fought back fiercely, persuading Daryl F. Zanuck to let Jaffe finish the role. They won on set, but not in life. The Day the Earth Stood Still became Jaffe's last major Hollywood film for many years. After that, he was silently shut out. No announcements, no formal charges, just phones that never rang. Jaffe was forced to return to his old profession, teaching mathematics to survive. A film about freedom of thought managed to keep an intellectual on screen but couldn't save the man himself from political fear off screen. 4. An award for peace recognition that came after fear. There's a bittersweet paradox surrounding The Day the Earth Stood Still upon release. It unsettled people. With time, it was honoured. The film was rejected by the US military, forced to remove its annihilation ending, and deemed dangerous during the Cold War. Yet, it was ultimately recognised for precisely those reasons. In 1951, it won a Golden Globe for promoting international understanding. A title that sounds diplomatic, even gentle. But beneath it lay a rare acknowledgement this wasn't just entertainment sci-fi, but a global warning issued at a moment when the world trembled under the shadow of nuclear weapons. Not until 1995, when Cold War fears had receded, was the film inducted into the National Film Registry, officially deemed a cultural and historical artifact worth preserving. What was once considered too extreme was finally recognised as necessary. Today, the film holds a 97% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, nearly perfect. But the significance isn't the number, it's time. The Day the Earth Stood Still was right, just too early when the world wasn't ready to listen. 3. A spacecraft born of architecture, not a film studio, perhaps because we're used to flying saucers in science fiction. Many people don't notice that the spacecraft in The Day the Earth Stood Still looks different. It isn't spiky, not aggressive. It doesn't flaunt weapons. Instead, it's made of smooth, continuous curves, almost elegant and very un-Hollywood. The reason lies with its designer. The ship wasn't created solely by studio artists. It involved collaboration with Frank Lloyd Wright, the legendary 20th century architect. Wright brought his philosophy into the film forms should be seamless, non-exhibitionist, and free of overt displays of power. A truly advanced object doesn't need to look threatening. That's why Klaatu's ship doesn't resemble a weapon. It feels like a structure that has moved beyond the need to intimidate. And that's what makes it truly alien, not its technology, but its mindset. This design deeply influenced later sci-fi, from classic saucers to modern minimalist spacecraft. A curious paradox, a film once considered ideologically dangerous carried a timeless design created by someone who had never worked in science fiction. 2. Theramin music fear echoing from empty space. One thing lingers long after The Day the Earth Stood Still ends, not the images but the sound. Long trembling drones as if the air itself were producing music. No clear melody, no familiar rhythm, just a hovering sense of unease. That sound came from Bernard Herrmann, and 2 theremin's instruments played without touch. The performer moves their hands through the air, and the sound changes with distance. No contact, no anchor. Music that seems unbound from the physical world. Herrmann didn't use the theremin as a novelty effect. He placed it at the center of the score. The result wasn't emotional guidance, but sustained instability. Even when the frame stands still, the viewer senses that something is wrong. The choice proved influential. Nearly every 1950s alien film copied the theramin's sound. It became the default voice of the unknown. A beautiful paradox, an instrument that requires no touch, reaches straight into humanity's deepest fear. The fear of what we cannot see but know is very close. 1. The equations are real when science isn't allowed to pretend. There's an easily overlooked detail in The Day the Earth Stood Still. The blackboard full of equations behind Professor Barnhart. No explanation, no emphasis. They're just there as intellectual scenery. But they're real. The formulas belong to the three-body problem in physics, famous for its complexity and chaotic behaviour. Not invented symbols, not decorative science. The film hired real scientists to ensure accuracy, knowing full well that most viewers wouldn't understand. This was an unusual choice for Hollywood. Instead of simplifying science, the film let it remain difficult. Not to show off, but to stay honest. Science in the film isn't a magical solution. It's a reminder that some problems remain beyond human control. And that's what makes it frightening. We're playing with things we don't fully understand, yet still believe we're smart enough to master them. 60 or 70 years have passed. The world has changed, but the question posed by The Day the Earth Stood Still remains intact once we've been warned. Will we change or continue to look away? That may be why the film hasn't aged. It isn't a prophecy about aliens. It's a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting fear, arrogance, and the capacity for self-destruction that always accompanies intelligence. If these behind-the-scenes stories have changed how you see the film, leave a comment which detail sent the strongest chill down your spine. And if you want to keep opening the dark, strange, but vibrant backstage doors of classic cinema, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.